You're watching Community Conversations, a ConcordTV production.
Welcome to Community Conversations. I'm Josh Hardy, the Executive Director of ConcordTV, and I'm your host for this program. It kind of came to my attention that we had this really accomplished student who is right in our own backyard. So thank you, Sydney Kilgore, Concord High School student. And we have Miss OC from the English Department of Concord High School. Thanks to both of you for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Cool. And so Sydney, a lot of people with everything going on, I think this may have gone under the radar, but you were this year's state champion of Poetry Out Loud. So I'm wondering if you could just sort of explain to us kind of how you got involved in the competition and then sort of how it all came to be.
So I did Poetry Out Loud for the first time last year when I was a sophomore. I didn't make it very far. I didn't make it past the school competition, and rightly so, because I just didn't do very well. But after that, I realized oh, this actually is a really cool competition, and I want to really try hard and try to make it somewhere next year. So this year I spent a lot of time choosing my poems and which ones that I really connected with and thought that I could do a good job of conveying the emotion of. And so I did my classroom competition, and then I went on to the school one, and I ended up winning that, which I was not expecting because there's a lot of really talented other classmates there that were doing it. And then a few weeks later, I went to the regional competition at the Courier Museum, and that one was a bit of a weird experience because we didn't get to see each other perform at all. Because everyone was just waiting backstage in a green room, and then they would call us up when it was our turn to perform. So I didn't get to see anyone else's performance, but that kind of took the pressure off, and I wasn't thinking of it so much as a competition and more just a celebration and a way to get to know other young people interested in poetry. So I just went out there and made some friends and did my best, and then it turns out I was one of the 3 finalists to go on to the state competition.
The End of Science Fiction by Lisa Muller. This is not fantasy. This is our life. We are the characters who have invaded the moon, who cannot stop the computers. We are the gods who can unmake the world in 7 days. Both hands are stopped at noon. We are beginning to live forever in lightweight aluminum bodies with numbers stamped on our backs. We dial our words like Muzak. We hear each other through water. The genre is dead. Invent something new. Invent a man and a woman, naked in a garden. Invent a child that will save the world. A man who carries his father out of a burning city. Invent a spool of thread that leads a hero to safety. Invent an island on which he abandons the woman who saved his life with no loss of sleep over his betrayal. Invent us as we were, before our bodies glittered and we stopped bleeding. Invent a shepherd who kills a giant, a girl who grows into a tree, a woman who refuses to turn her back on her past and is changed to salt, a boy who steals his brother's birthright and becomes the head of a nation. Invent real tears, hard love, slow-spoken, ancient words, difficult as a child's first steps across a room.
Good. Now let's turn to our faculty member that we have here. So I was impressed. So ConcordTV recorded the school-wide competition, and there were a lot of impressive students who seemed like they had gone through the memorization and they knew everything really well, good emotion. What do the performance of the Concord High School students and how serious it's taken? I mean, what are your thoughts on how students are prepped for that at Concord High School?
Okay, well, most of the students start off if they're interested or in the competition at the classroom level. And so with their teachers, they choose a poem from, there are hundreds of poems on the Poetry Out Loud site. And then in class, often there are lessons that have to do with the criteria that the judges in the competition are going to be looking for, the performance criteria and the accuracy. And then I think from class to class, students do various assignments to help with memorization and also to help with performance. But I think some students who are really interested then really go that extra mile on their own and really practice and practice in front of family members and friends. And I tell them to carry the poem in their pocket all the time so they can take it out and read it whenever they have the chance.
And so it seems like you have the memorization factor, which I know I would have a tough time with. That's always been like my issue is memorization. But I think also it seems like there's an aspect almost of like performing arts to this, that the kids have to find a balance between conveying the right emotion and understanding the poem and performing it. I mean, and I've recorded these a couple times over the last couple of years, and it really does seem like there is sort of this performance art aspect to this that a lot of people may not realize.
Yeah. Did you want to talk to that, Cindy, or would you like?
Yeah, I think there's definitely something there with that. Like something that I noticed at this year's school competition and at the regionals one too, that there was a lot of theater kids there. Like pretty much everyone I met at the regionals was involved in theater or performing arts in some way. So it's definitely the same breed of people that is into it.
Yeah. So yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say that is one of the categories is dramatic appropriateness. And so it's really, students need to find the line between conveying the emotion of the poem, but not being overly dramatic. So you want to let the words do most of the work, but also the use of your voice and your body are also a key element in a good performance.
Yeah. And in my performance, my sophomore year, the first time I did it, like I was definitely more involved in theater then, but I think I took it too far in the theater direction, and I was like more treating the poem like a monologue that I was performing, but I couldn't like really personally relate to it at all, and it's more just kind of me trying to act and put on a show. But then this year I tried a lot more to focus on poems that I really emotionally connected to, and more just figuring out the best way to convey that emotion, and rather than just like trying to act it out.
Right. Now you have 3 different poems that you learned that you memorized. How long did it take you to get all those down? How much practice to really know them by heart?
I was able to do it like relatively quickly. Like my main strategy was that I would just like type out the poem like line by line, getting every single piece of punctuation and line break absolutely correct until I had it completely memorized. And then from there, I just practiced like repeating it and saying out loud over and over again until I had all of that down. And then once I had it completely memorized is when I'd more move on to like the actual interpretation of it. And for my second 2 poems, when I was preparing for the regional competition, I actually didn't start memorizing them until like 3 days before the competition, which was probably not a great move on my part because it caused me a lot of stress. But I don't know, I guess in a way, like it helped me like stay fresh with them and made it so like it was always right there in my mind and it didn't get stale or anything.
The Conqueror Worm by Edgar Allan Poe. Lo, it is a gala night within the lonesome latter years, an angel throng, bewinged, bedight in veils and drowned in tears, sit in a theatre to see a play of hopes and fears, while the orchestra breathes fitfully the music of the spheres. Mimes in the form of God on high mutter and mumble low, and hither and thither fly, mere puppets they, who come and go at bidding of vast formless things that shift the scenery to and fro, flapping from out their condor wings invisible woe. That motley drama, oh, be sure it shall not be forgot, with its phantom chased for evermore by a crowd that sees it not, through a circle that ever returneth in to the self-same spot, and much of madness, and more of sin, and horror, the soul of the plot. But see, amid the mimic rout, a crawling shape intrude, a blood-red thing that writhes from out the scenic solitude. It writhes with mortal pangs, the mimes become its food. And seraph saw that vermin fangs in human gore imbued. Out, out are the lights, out all, and over each quivering form, the curtain, a funeral pall, comes down with the rush of a storm, while the angels, all pallid and wan, uprising, unveiling, affirm that the play is the tragedy, man, and its hero, the conqueror worm.
So now, turning it back to Miss OC, so the aspect of poetry and literature, I mean, it seems like this whole competition is very important for students to learn as part of their whole high school education component. Now, how does this for you, how does this fit into curriculum or overall student learning at Concord High School?
Well, I think it fulfills a number of different competencies that we have in the class. So I this year I did it in both my theater studies class and in my English 11 media literacy classes. And so obviously one of our important competencies is speaking and listening. And so this certainly helps students to work on public speaking skills, because every student, whether they go on to compete or not, gets up in front of the class and performs the poem. And I'm not a big, we're going to memorize all these facts, but I think memory is an important skill. And so for students to be able to learn how to memorize something, to spend time with it, and to really use those parts of the brain that are thinking about it. But then also the analysis of the poems themselves. They do, in my class, they do a little bit of research on the poet and can find some information out about that. And then they have to answer questions to analyze and understand the poem and look at the figurative language in the poem, to look at the context, the story, how it works on a literal level and how it works on that more figurative level. So there are just so many skills. And they also get the opportunity to look at a lot of great poetry, because the poetry that's available on the website is everything from very early poems to very recent poems. So they really can, I think every student, if they spend enough time on the site, will find a poem that they connect with.
And the poems that are on that website vary in length. There must be like a minimum number of words, right? But I noticed in the high school competition, some were, seem pretty much on the quicker end, but there's some that actually carried on quite a bit longer. So there's a variation there, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, yes. And actually, because a lot of students felt that choosing a longer poem would help them to win, which sometimes a longer poem doesn't mean that it's more difficult. They actually, one of the criteria is that at least one of the poems the students choose has to be fewer than 25 lines. But I used to tell my classes they weren't allowed to do Fire and Ice because it was the shortest poem. And I knew it by heart just because I'd heard it so many times. But there's everything from Fire and Ice to much longer, more complicated poems.
Am I remembering correctly? Is Fire and Ice the one that's been used before as like sort of the test poem, like at the beginning of the competition to sort of calibrate judges' scores?
Yes.
Has that been used before? Yeah. I know I've heard it. So Sydney, so the only poem of your three that I heard was the one you recited at the high school competition, which was The End of Science Fiction by Lysel Mueller, is that correct? Lysel?
I think so. I don't
Yeah.
know. Lysel Mueller.
And I really liked it. Must be something that was written incredibly recent because it felt so modern. It felt like it was addressing, concerns of a rapidly evolving world. I thought it was a really cool poem. I mean, did it stand out to you because of the way it flowed, like the language of it, or was it something about the message, or what stood out to you about that?
When I was first looking at poems, I went onto the Poetry Out Loud website, and they organized different sections into different genres and topics in their poems. And I chose the mythology and folklore section because that's something I've always been really interested in, and I thought I would find a good poem there. And I saw that poem, And just on my first read through, and I was kind of like skimming through it, like all these lines jumped out at me and all these allusions to like myths and biblical stories. And it was kind of a cool feeling to be like, oh, I know what they're talking about there.
Yep.
And then I actually went through and read the poem, and then I was like, wow, this is a really good message, and one that I definitely agree with, about how these stories and real human connection is what's most important, even though our technology is advancing so much.
Well, and it even seems like the current situation we all find ourselves in now, where we're all so separate, a message like that maybe even resonates now more than ever. So little did we know it during the high school competition, what was coming up.
Oh yeah.
And so if you could just explain, Sydney or Miss OC, either one of you, what the process was supposed to be in terms of going on to national, and sort of what the current situation is with that. Because I know, Sydney, and I hate to, it might be a sore subject, but you would have been going down to Washington, D.C., if I understand correctly. So sort of what that process would have been, and if you've heard anything about if there is an alternate solution they've come up with.
Yeah, well, I don't know too much about what the process would have been, because this is obviously my like first time going through this. But I do know that during April vacation, there would have been like a couple-day long event going on in Washington, D.C. with the national competition, and it would have been all expenses paid trip. And I was definitely looking forward to it, but I really understand that it's for the best that they've canceled it. But since they had to plan out so far in advance, and a lot of states didn't even get to name their own champion, then there really aren't any plans to reschedule it for this year.
It's too bad. Any thoughts, Miss OC, on anything about that process in a normal year, about how that typically would have gone?
Yeah, so in a normal year, it starts at the classroom level, then goes to the school level, and then it goes in New Hampshire. Because we have so many schools participating, we have regional, and that's where it kind of stopped. On a year without a global pandemic, Sydney and the other students from the 4 different regional competitions would have gone to the State House and had a live competition there, open to the public, with live musicians and judges from around the state, and that night we would have chosen our champion, who, as Sydney said, would have gone on to Washington. Instead, the winners from the regional competitions made videos, I believe, of themselves performing the poems, and then sent those to the judges, and so then the judges made their decisions from there.
Yeah, and initially ConcordTV was going to record the statewide, and then obviously it didn't happen in person. But like you said, Sydney, it's understandable why everything has had to be canceled. But yeah, I didn't want to end it on kind of a down note, but I just think I wanted just to be able to recognize you, Sydney, because you represent what is so great about the Concord School District and Concord High School, and the fact that it's no coincidence that Concord constantly has students who are achieving and going above and beyond. So just wanted you to know that it has not gone unnoticed. So congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
The Bookshelf of the God of Infinite Space by Jeffrey Skinner. You would expect an uncountable number. Acres and acres of books in rows like wheat or gold bullion, or that the words just appear in the mind like banner headlines. In fact, there is one shelf holding a modest number, 10 or 12 volumes, no dust jackets because no dust, covers made of gold or skin or golden skin, or creosote, or rain-soaked macadam, or some mix of salt and glass. You turn a page, and mountains rise. Clouds, drawn by children, bubble in the sky. You are 20 again, trying to read a map dissolving in your hands. I say you, and mean me. Say God, and mean librarian, who, after long research, offers you a glass of water and an apple. You, grateful to discover your name, a footnote in that book.
Just want to thank both of you for coming in and talking to us virtually. It was nice to see you remotely. Maybe next year we can do this in person. But thanks to both of you for being on. Thank you to our audience for tuning in to Community Conversations, and we will see you next time. Thank you.